yet another shocking and, might I add, highly regressive ruling from the American Supreme Court. To discuss and decode this and understand what ramifications it could have on the blacks and other ethnic minorities in the United States, I'm now joined by Cynthia Stephen, independent researcher and development policy analyst, Professor Badri Narayan, Dalit activist and political analyst, and Professor Rajan Kumar, international policies expert. Professor Badri Narayan, let me start with you. Affirmative action, also referred to as, let's say, quotas that we have for the backward classes of a society. This has been a polarizing issue in India. This has clearly been a polarizing issue between the liberals and the conservatives in the United States for a long time, and it is largely seen as a divisive issue in many parts of the world. How do you, being a Dalit activist, being somebody who's probably encountered, questions about why we need reservations in India 1,000 times, how do you react to this judgment of the US Supreme Court, which I have no hesitation in calling downright regressive?
Yeah, this entire policy, the protective discrimination policy or affirmative action, is divisive, and yes, it's an issue of political polarization in various societies because it creates identity assertion, it creates identity category. Identity category can be utilized by politicians for political mobilization. So first thing is very clear. Second thing is what happens due to the due to this intervention of protective discrimination policies, various communities get being empowered slowly. And after certain time, they acquire not equal, but around equal kind of position. And that create again a jealousy among the dominant section and majoritarian section, and that jealousy again creates a political polarization. But I think any state needs to always constantly review the progress and the social impact by this protective discrimination policy through their own governance strategies, or maybe by court also. But I think court should maybe give the verdict, but the evaluations can be done by the state itself, and that based on that evaluation, one can based on the data, the concrete data, one can take decision of either postponement, either dropping the reservation protective reservation policy or not. So a ground research is needed to understand the social impact of these reservation policies, how it may empower the community, whether it needs or not, whether it's become really relevant or not nowadays. It all needs to be rigorously studied through research and then bring to the policy domain and also the legal domain. So in that way, but the politics is always involved in that. Like whenever this kind of issues come, the two groups become formed among politicians, and one take one side, another take one another side. But it is in the U.S. society where the both side has a very strong position. Not in Indian society. Indian society, I think it's very rare to find the people who are against affirmative action. People, means politicians, mostly supports affirmative action, or they can say review it, not more than that. But in America, they can have a kind of condition where they can say it should drop or it should continue. So that's my position, which I would like to submit here.
Okay. Professor Rajan Kumar, let me come to you. Now, the conservative majority on the US Supreme Court, in its ruling, has essentially said that these programs at Harvard University and North Carolina University lack measurable objectives warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, and involve racial stereotyping. That is the reasoning they've used to justify this ruling. But what struck me is what the minority judges said, the three liberals, all of whom have dissented with this judgment. They say that, this ruling has announced color blindness for all by legal fiat, by deeming race irrelevant in law, does not make it so in life. President Biden has said something similar. He says that discrimination still exists in America. Today's decision doesn't change that. And isn't that the problem? You know, we have discussed ad nauseum the struggles of the Dalits and other backward classes here in India. Yes, discourse on does 21st century India need reservations still continues. But mercifully, we have persisted with these reservations. The forefathers of India's constitution foresaw, that there was a need for affirmative action. But the United States Supreme Court ruling has dealt a massive blow to that country's rich tradition of diversity and inclusivity by practically ending affirmative action in higher education. How do you see this verdict? Is it, in a sense, rooted in ignorance, as some people say?
Thank you. Thank you, Neha ji, for having me here. I think this is a landmark decision, and this kind of, as you rightly use the word, it upends the landmark policy which was being pursued in the United States right since the 1960s. And I've been a student of two universities in the US 20 years back, 2 decades back. So I understand the affirmative action policy there. And it was supposed to be one of the important, landmark policy decisions which provided some kind of, inclusiveness, diversity to the university campus. And in my view, it was absolutely necessary. It is necessary. The discrimination exists in American society today, and the Dalits and lot of other minorities are discriminated. If you see the per capita income, if you see the socioeconomic status, if you see the level of education among the Afro-American citizen and the white citizen, there's a huge gap. And to cover that, this was not just about helping the black population, helping the Afro-American population. This was also about making the white people understand the reality and making them understand how the society can be more inclusive. The debate that you are referring to, the same kind of debate also persists in India. The debate which is meritocracy versus the quota system or the nation building, what you say. So in my view, if you take a very narrow perspective of what you consider merit in terms of grades and the scores that you get in GRE, GMAT, etc. So that's a very narrow definition of merit. If you master certain skills, you will score very high in GRE and GMAT, and all of us have done that. But if you want to build a nation, if you want to build a real inclusive society, you have to have this kind of what you call positive discrimination. What were the arguments given by the other side people? By other side, I mean the students for fair admission, the which put the plea in the Supreme Court and which has been fighting the case in the United States for a long time for stopping this kind of progressive discrimination policy. And the same kind of organizations you have in India also, Youth for Equality, for instance. So they argue that this goes against equality, and you rightly referred to 14th Amendment, etc. And the judges, the conservative judges, 6 judges, the majority of them in this particular decision, they said that you cannot identify a person on the basis of race, and this kind of reinforces the identity. So these were the major logics given by the conservative justices there, and they argued that this has not helped the black population or the Afro-American population much. So it has kind of contributed to some kind of polarization in the university campus, but also in the United States as a whole. So these were the arguments, but I find these what is happening actually, that Republican conservative ideology is being implemented and through the backdoor channel through the Supreme Court, because you have the judges, so you can have the very conservative policies on abortion, as you rightly pointed out, on the gun laws, and also now what you see that on the very important the policy on university admissions, and this was about 2 universities in particular. One was University of North Carolina, and second one was Harvard. But now all the other campuses in other states, they'll also start challenging this law. and you have very strong white lobbyists there. A very strong racist community is there in United States, and there is no debate about it. So they would kind of, they would again put plea in other states, and probably this kind of policy will cease to exist now, and that's very unfortunate. Also, let me tell you that there are several states in the United States which have already banned, even the liberal states like California, which has huge minority population or the non-white population. Even California has banned this kind of positive discrimination policy in the university campus. So, in my view, this is a kind of this is not good for American democracy. This is not good for liberalism. America cannot champion liberalism in other places and be conservative domestically. So, in my view, this is a very regressive policy, and I totally agree with you.
Like I said, I have no hesitation in calling this policy regressive. And is it out of touch with reality? Cynthia, Stephen, I, for one, believe that the US Supreme Court, now dominated by conservative judges, is really taking the oldest democracy in the world back by centuries. There was the shocking abortion verdict, I beg your pardon. Everything they've said about guns. We will talk about that in a moment. But for now, let's just focus on this latest ruling that effectively ends all affirmative action in higher education in the United States. Whenever somebody asks in India, why does 21st century India need reservations for Dalits and other backward classes? Or every time Republicans ask in the US, or the US Supreme Court says that there is racial stereotyping involved in affirmative action, there is no need for it. Are they completely oblivious to the reality on the ground? Are they deliberately ignoring the fact that whether it is Dalits in India, whether it is blacks and other ethnic minorities in the US, these are communities that have faced discrimination for centuries, and that discrimination exists even today in 2023. That is why there is a need for affirmative action. That is how great democracies uphold the principles of inclusivity and diversity.
I'd like to bring in this. I completely agree with you, but I'd like to talk since the issue of meritocracy or merit has been brought in. I think this, in the Indian context, it has a particular resonance because we have a group called something called Youth for Equality. But here we are not talking about equality so much as equity. We're talking about social justice. So I have here a definition of both equality and equity. It says equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. This is the argument presented by the meritocracy section. But we are talking about here equity, and that is the real yardstick that we should be talking about when we talk about justice. So equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. So that is what affirmative action is in the US, and that is what the reservations try to accomplish in India. We are not talking about equality here. There is no equality. It's a very unequal and unjust society that we have. So the provisions that exist are for providing equity. And in that sense, I say that I agree with you that the Supreme Court in the US has disappointed all of us who work for social justice. And it is of a piece with some of the other conservative moves that have happened, not only in the US, but even in India. We have had things like the Supreme Court when it was appealed, when the 10% reservation for EWS was brought in. There was an appeal, but the courts ruled in favor of it, and it has been retained. But there, the whole principle of equity is turned upside down. because poverty is not, I mean, economic status is not the real reason for the situation of the Dalits. You may refer to backward castes, but in India we have not just backward castes, but we have SCs and STs who are much more disadvantaged in many ways than the backward classes due to historical and social, cultural, and political reasons. And so we really need to it is very unfortunate that a regressive judgment has happened not only in India but even now in the US. So it's a little difficult for us to see US as a place where there is a it's a place of equal opportunity. Actually,
Absolutely, because the United States is not only the oldest democracy in the world, it is seen as a beacon of hope for all democratic principles around the world, and that is certainly how the United States would want the rest of the world to view it. So these judgments have dealt a massive blow to the very principles that the United States and its constitution are founded on. The fact that the US says it, leads by example. Let me now go back to Professor Badri Narayan. Sir, I know that you have to leave us in a few minutes, but I want to ask you this question. In the earlier segment, you outlined the arguments that we've heard for and against reservations. But I want to put a more pointed question to you and would like a more forthright answer this time. Do you not believe that this judgment by the United States Supreme Court deals a massive blow to the principle of diversity and inclusiveness in the United States and essentially completely ignores the discrimination that blacks as well as other ethnic minorities continue to face in that country? We all saw what happened with the killing of George Floyd. We all saw what happened with the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. The discrimination against blacks and other ethnic minorities is as much a reality in the US today as it may have been a century ago, with the degrees maybe having changed. Doesn't the Supreme Court of the United States, in a sense, display ignorance of this fundamental fact?
See, yeah, actually, you're very right. Actually, this kind of decision in long run or immediately also weaken the democratic fervor of the society. And it may affect not only US but the discourse of the entire world, because most of Dalit movements of the marginals were very inspired by the American black movements, and it's in India also. And so it is going as the word, the term you have used, the death of hope. In that way, it's maybe death of hope. But and here I'm fully agree. But the any this kind of affirmative action or protective solution policy, there is always creates a for and against, and there are two views always sustaining society, and these two views or multiple views provides us a space to rethink that constant, as I said, constant research on the social impact of the discrimination or protective discrimination policies on society. And based on those data, because for and against is very easy, but based on the data, one can take a position. And here in US society, as you said, still it has a relevance because not only blacks, even the liberals, very politicians, very white people, they are saying, no, there is a need of that society. And if there is a need of that society, it may continue. And but Supreme Court decision on this may going to create a new discourse not only in US but all over the world. And this discourse may be seen as a positive or negative against the democratic principle of protective distribution policy. But it's going to be done. It is not only within the boundary of the US, it is going to affect the entire world.
Absolutely. This could have a ripple effect around the world. Today, if the conservatives are celebrating this ruling in the Supreme Court, this ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States, you could have conservatives in other parts of the world, including right here in India, saying why should India then have reservations when, you know, even the Supreme Court of the oldest democracy in the world does not feel the need for it. And this is about higher education. This is about the future of an entire generation, or shall we say generations of Americans, just the way reservations have impacted and will continue to impact generations of Indians belonging to certain backward communities. Let me go back to Professor Rajan Kumar at this point. Professor Rajan Kumar, uh, you know, do you fear that this is something that could very strongly impact the educational rights of young Americans belonging to the black community and other ethnic minorities such as the Latinos, the Hispanic community? You know, even though President Biden has urged colleges and universities not to allow this ruling to be the last word, we are given to understand that colleges and universities may still have a degree of discretion. But the worry is that when a ruling of this nature comes from the top court of a country, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for individual entities like colleges and universities to then, in a sense, go against the grain of that judgment and say, no, we will continue to consider race as a factor in our admissions. And do you also fear that something like this could have a ripple effect in other parts of the world, maybe reignite the whole debate about reservations in India?
Two very important questions, Neha. One is about impact on US university campuses, and second on India and other countries. So let me tell you that this will certainly impact the admission policy in the United States, and because most of the universities in the United States, they do have policy of what they call, basically, they don't use the term positive discrimination, etc. The better term is diversity. So and they do not have fixed number. In India, for instance, we have fixed number 27%, 15, 7.5, etc. But in US, they don't have fixed number. They were expected to have people from different communities in the name of diversity. So what the White House is saying, the president's house, president is trying to say that it will give instructions to the university to maintain diversity. How will that be enforceable? How will that be implemented in real terms? That is difficult to say at the moment, but the way it will work in US, I'll tell you on the basis of my experience there, that many of the universities in US are very liberal. But at the same time, many of the universities in many places are very conservative, dominated by people who support Republicans. So what you'll see that for instance, University of California, Berkeley is a very radical university. It's a kind of very liberal university. So they will continue to have this kind of policy, or formally or informally, but in places like Texas, in places like Kentucky, in places like Detroit, etc., in many places it can be very, very difficult. So this will certainly impact the admission of the Black and the Hispanic community. And interestingly, the way the entire plea was put forward, the complaint was made by somebody who is Asian. So the charge was that the people, Asian American, basically Asia, people from all over Asia, and in Asia, in United States, mostly they refer to people from China and East Asia. So basically they
Isn't that ironical, Professor Rajan? You're absolutely right. It's been said that this affirmative action is discriminatory towards Asian Americans. But come to think of it, they are also a minority community. This sounds almost ironical.
I think the reason it was the plea was made by the Asian American just to make the case stronger. Now if it was coming from the white side, they'll say this is racism, this is white dominant narrative. But if it is coming from Asian American, so they will say now they'll say that Asian American is minority and Asian American is not being included, so they are being discriminated. So just to make the case stronger, it's not that the Robert or the conservative judges, they believe that the Asian American should also be included. Had they made a rational policy, they would have probably said that, okay, So within that sphere of affirmative policy, Asian Americans should also be included. But that was not the case. What they said that this goes against the idea of equality, equity, justice, whatever you call it. So they argue, and this also reinforces the sense of black identity. And they also said that the black cannot be taken as something. Most of the university in the US, they used to say that the black, they bring the culture, the ideas, which probably is not there among the white people. So the judges said that to say that black brings something else, so that is discriminatory. So basically the same argument which were given by the liberals, it was turned upside down, and it was argued against them. That the issue of civil rights was brought. Civil rights is all about equality. Do you have equality today among the blacks and the whites? No, absolutely no. If you see, there is a vast gap. Not sometimes I feel that the discrimination in the US is much more than what you see in India. And in India, at least we have tried to rationalize. Some of the people from the upper caste, they were left out, so now we have 10% kind of reservation for them also. But that rationalization has not been done. It has been completely rejected by the Supreme Court. So that's one part of your answer of your question. The second part, this might impact India, but let me tell you that every politics is different. And at the moment, almost the majority of the political parties in India, they understand that you need to support the people who have been left out, whether it's the backward caste or the Dalits here. So I don't think in real terms that it will lead to some change. Yes, some of the groups might get more active, then argue that if it has happened in United States, it should happen in India also. But the kind of politics that I see today, and the kind of political parties argument that we see, some of the political parties are today arguing that reservations should be there in the private sector also. So it's not going to impact India that way legally.
You're right. Of course, legally, it cannot possibly impact any country, any other country, any society outside of the United States. I only meant whether it could have a ripple effect in terms of reigniting the debate in other parts of the world where affirmative action has been an equally polarizing issue. But yes, thank God for the fact that in India, there seems to be this broad political consensus that we do need reservations for the backward classes. Final question to you, Cynthia Stephen. The US Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action, practically ending it in higher education, the stance they have taken on guns, and like I said at the start of the show, who can forget that horrific judgment of January 2022, where the US Supreme Court overturned the landmark Roe versus Wade ruling, effectively banning abortion across the United States. Now, that is, of course, a verdict that has already very negatively impacted the lives of American women. And deprived them of their hard-won abortion rights, rights that they had won after decades and decades of struggle. I firmly believe that this current US Supreme Court, dominated by conservative justices, is taking the United States of America back by a century. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think definitely it is a trend not only in America. It seems to be a kind of a zeitgeist. At this time, a lot of conservative, positions are being taken in courts, and the same has been seen. Even a similar trend is seen even in in India. So definitely, it's a pity when hard-won legal rights are undermined by later judgments. So therefore, we actually it's a warning to each and every the citizen, the global citizen, that eternal vigilance is the price of freedom. So we can't afford, as a society or as civil society or as individuals or NGOs or people involved in rights, we eternally have to be on our toes to protect our hard-won freedoms. I think that's very essential, and that's the message that I think that needs to be taken seriously